Notes or no notes, we attentively listened to all the people who spoke from this stage to us, and I'm sure we were making mental notes of what they've said, thinking that maybe we should ask some questions, but you will have this opportunity when listening and talking to participants in the second panel. I will soon hand the floor over to Robert Zinger, who is Chief Executive Officer and Executive Vice President of the World Jewish Congress. And I do invite to this stage the participants in the discussion, Francois Croquette, Human Rights Ambassador, France, Andrew Baker, representative of the OSCE Chairperson-in-Office on combating anti-Semitism. He's also Director of International Jewish Affairs of the Jewish American Committee. And Pavlo Klimkin, the Minister of the Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, is supposed to take part in this discussion as well. And as you heard, Elan Carr, who is the US Special Envoy on combating anti-Semitism, is on his way and will join us presently. Mr. Zinger, would you like to take over? Attention, attention. I'm pretty sure that the part that you're going to hear now is very interesting and significant as well, especially chaired by such a moderator as Mr. Zinger. And after the main messages are delivered from this stage, you will have the opportunity to ask questions of the participants. There are people with mics working in the audience, and please raise your hands, even while, yes, have a look. One person, and there will be more, of course. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and you will be given a mic. And dear ladies and gentlemen, you demonstrated a very high level of organization before the start of our forum. Please take your seats again. And as some of the seats have become vacant, you may even improve your position in the hall. And Mr. Zinger, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning. It looks to me like a very Jewish meeting, so please be seated. Please ask people from outside to come in. This is the first panel of this session. So if somebody were, Omri, just ask people from outside to come in. Elan Carr will join us just in one minute. He's already arrived and he's at the hotel, so he will join us in a minute. We'll start the panel. But I'm just waiting a minute for other people to join us. I see many familiar faces in the room, so we're in a good company. Yeah, just bring everybody in. Okay. My name is Robert Zinger. I'm the CEO of the World Jewish Congress. I believe it already was said, and I'm following the steps of our president, Ronald Lauder. So distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Pane Tepanove, I first of all would like to recognize a few people here in the room who really were not only behind this forum, but behind many of the activities in Ukraine. So Boris Loshkin was mentioned a few times, the new president of the Confederation of Jewish Communities of Ukraine, Boris Fuchsman, the previous president, Andrea Damovsky, president of VAAD, Yaakov Bleich, we just said yesterday, when I came here 25 or 29 years ago, what was it? 29 years ago, he just arrived and built here a very nice community. Many other people I see here, Naomi Ben-Ami from the previous ambassador, Israeli ambassador to Ukraine, representatives from different embassies, all the dear guests. I'm very honored to be with you here today. And perhaps for the younger generation, the meeting in Kyiv on anti-Semitism is nothing unusual. But for someone of my generation, someone born and bred in this country, it is anything but. As Netta Briskin said, I come from Chernivtsi, a city with a storied Jewish past. Once a hothouse of the Yiddish culture that thrived in cities and towns across this region, until it ultimately became a place of unimaginable torment. By the late 1950s, when I was born, only a small fraction of that Jewish population remained in Western Ukraine. Rather than try to preserve the culture that once again thrived there, the Soviet authorities attempt to crush it. Of all the minorities in the Soviet Union, only the Jews had no right to cultivate their traditions. And like my family, most left the Soviet Union and did not look back. So bitter were their memories of anti-Semitism. Had the Soviet regime persisted for a few more years, perhaps no Jews would have remained and their presence would have been forgotten. However, a miracle happened. The chains of the captive nations were broken. Communism was swept away, and Ukraine was reborn. And Jewish life, which had been carried on in secret, suddenly began to bloom. Had anyone told me when I was growing up that one day I would go on to a career with the representative body of the world Jewry, and that I would be invited to address a conference on anti-Semitism in Kyiv, capital of independent Ukraine, I would never have believed it. But here we are. Every time I come back to this country, and I come often, I'm amazed at the vitality of Jewish life. Schools, synagogues, museums, summer camps, and so many other institutions that indicate the flourishing of Jewish life in a place that had been written off long ago. For enabling that to happen, we are very grateful to the Ukrainian authorities, and it speaks well of their commitment to freedom and democracy. Of course, as all of us know, the situation is still far from being ideal. Sadly, anti-Semitism in this country, just like in the rest of the world, has not disappeared. Today, it is mainly seen in the failure to confront Ukraine's wartime history. We have to look back at history with open eyes. To its credit, all times Ukraine has done that. But at others, it has not. And unfortunately, we often see glorification of so-called heroes who played a role in the destruction of age-old communities. It is our hope that the Ukrainian government will demonstrate greater sensitivity on this issue and will act with real resolve. Accessories to genocide are not worthy of acclaim. Ukraine has many real heroes. It does not need to pay tribute to those who damaged its good name. Today, all over the world, anti-Semitism has again raised its ugly head. We have witnessed a surge of anti-Semitic incidents, including the use of lethal violence, even in places in which we thought anti-Semitism was not a problem. In the United States, we were shocked when worshippers in 2 synagogues were attacked within 6 months. And the list of incidents continues. No one has a monopoly on anti-Semitism, neither the left, nor the right, nor the extremist Islam, and as my President Ronald said, unfortunately, anti-Semitism became a mainstream. However, there is one thing on which we can all agree, and that is that the Jew, he is the enemy, even if they try to hide their hatred as opposition to Israel. Unlike in the years past, today, it appears that you can be anti-Semite and you needn't even be ashamed of it. Anti-Semitism, as I said, is a part of a mainstream. Last week, we marked Yom HaShoah, and next week will mark Yom HaZikaron, Israel's memorial days for the Holocaust and the soldiers who fell in its wars. Yom HaZikaron teaches us the cost of having a Jewish state. But Yom HaShoah teaches us the cost of not having one. I think we have a very distinguished panel with us today, and the structure of this panel will be that I'll let each one of the panelists to have a short presentation, and then we'll have some questions from the floor. After this, we'll try to summarize this. So I believe that we should be done in something like 60 minutes, correct? Pavlo Klimkin already spoke to us, and I had the privilege to meet him a number of times. Whatever. Okay. Pavlo Klimkin is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, a physicist. He has worked in the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry since 1993 and has served in many senior posts since then, including as Director of EU Department. In 2010, he was named Deputy Foreign Minister. Ambassador Klimkin played a central role in negotiating the Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement. He served as both Deputy Foreign Minister and Chief of Staff of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry until 2012, when he was appointed Ambassador of Ukraine to Germany. He has served as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine since 2014, and Minister Klimkin, we were very privileged and delighted to hear what you had to say here about the IRA definition and Ukraine joining IRA. So please, the floor is yours for initial statement.
The mic is on, yeah? It's great. Look, thanks a lot for especially underlining I'm not a kind of normal diplomat, so I'm a physicist by education. It's great to be here, and I believe we need to have a slightly different angle on our discussion right now. Firstly, I believe what is going on in the sense of rise of anti-Semitism is not just worrying, it's extremely worrying. And what is important to understand, with all kind of our commitment and interest, for statistics, with all kind of the necessity of national view, and we should have such a discussion, anti-Semitism is now, unfortunately, a global reality. And we could be effective, not only in the sense of statements, because again, we are very good on different kinds of statements. We are very good on being vigilant. But it's time now to get proactive on anti-Semitism. And it's my first point, let's discuss it. Secondly, it was one of my key considerations when we prepared the whole package of documents. Bureaucracy is unfortunately still there, and Ukrainian bureaucracy is probably not the best bureaucracy in the world. But we prepared the whole package of documents to get clearance, to join the International Remembrance Alliance, and of course, IRA definition. And here it's my second point. We need to give up on all kind of national definitions. If you talk to some of our scientists is still there, let's have something special Ukrainians. We are better on fighting and understanding Semitism. It's simply not the way forward. We need something which is recognized by everyone and supported by everyone, and especially here in this country. So fundamentally, it's something which we all should bring forward. My third point, you've just mentioned I'm a diplomat. I remember myself as our ambassador to Germany, still young and hopeful diplomat. And I remember once going to the German city of Mainz, to one of the very special churches where Marc Chagall, as his last and ultimate performance, created window glasses. I was really tired when I got over there, but I spent there almost 2 hours. And one of the special symbols I remember is his angel with 2 faces. You know, the history is never black and white. We need to be fair to our history. We need to be committed to our history and to recognize what had happened and what had not happened. And let's have very good and fair discussion on that, because I know that yesterday some of the ideas turned up, and I would be ready to engage in these discussions, because with all kind of friendly teasing up and about my background on physics, I pretend to understand something also on Ukrainian history. And last but not least, because the name of our panel also about the role of the global Jewish community. I believe also here we have to do more. Now we've been talking about new ideas, about new possible concepts, plans for the Middle East. And here, anything could be done, really. And I basically shared with my friends in Washington my ideas. We were members of the Security Council a couple of years ago. But fundamentally, there should be a red line here, and it's the future and security of Israel, because without that, if you take it out of the Lego, there could be no security, not only for this region, but for the whole world. Let me stop here, basically mapping out these 4 points, and it's great to be there.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. And as I said, and really it comes from many members of the community here, from many organizations, I think that the Jewish community of Ukraine has a real friend in the Foreign Ministry, and thank you for your support over all these years. Francois Croquette is the French ambassador for human rights in charge of the international dimension of the Holocaust, looted property, and the duty to remember. Ambassador Croquette joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1988. Among his many missions, he was an advisor to the French embassy in Moscow and in London, and later deputy director of North American, before joining the Senate as diplomatic advisor to the President of France. Before I turn the mic over to you, permit me to say, we are encouraged by the position of the French government in fighting anti-Semitism, despite very troubling data coming out of France. In fact, I recently met your Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, and also had dinner a few weeks ago with the Jean-Yves Le Drian, Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs. President Macron recently addressed the Kyiv dinner in Paris and spoke about France adopting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, and we hope that Ukraine will follow your steps. Please, Ambassador.
I'm fine. Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you very much to all of you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here in Kyiv on what is an important moment for Ukraine, an important moment also for France and all of the countries which combat anti-Semitism. Indeed, as you've just said, France, and with it all of Europe and Western countries, including the United States, as the recent attacks tragically reminded us, are faced with an unprecedented resurgence of anti-Semitism. As you've just reminded us during the dinner of the Representative Council of the French Jewish Institutions, the French President Emmanuel Macron spoke firmly about this. He spoke about the memory of the men, women, and children who were killed in our country in the 21st century because they are Jewish by anti-Semitic hatred. And to fight this scourge, he acknowledged the deficiency of the laws and the action plans that had been adopted until now, and he announced the implementation of strong measures. Firstly, to name the evil, to call a spade a spade. As you said, France will implement the working definition of anti-Semitism adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It is about enabling our security forces, our magistrates, our teachers, to be better trained and more effective in opposing those who try to conceal their hatred of the Jewish people and their will to destroy the state of Israel behind an alleged political disagreement. I think this is a very important step, and I'm delighted to hear that Ukraine has filed a request to join the IHRA. I lead the French delegation in IHRA, and I can say that France will unequivocally support this move, and that we will welcome Ukraine as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Now, coming back to fighting anti-Semitism in France, we are determined to fight the facts as they are. There are traditional forms of anti-Semitism, and they are alive and kicking. This is why the government has decided to disband far-right associations and groups that nourish hate, promote discrimination, and call for violence. But there is also a new form of anti-Semitism, which is based in a radical interpretation of Islam. This ideology corrupts some of our suburbs to the point of coercing some of our fellow countrymen and women to an unbearable interior exodus. So we've decided to launch a Republican recovery of these territories, and this will require the participation of all the services of the French state. We're going to improve the tracking and the penalization of the perpetrators of anti-Semitic acts. For instance, by encouraging all the victims of anti-Semitism to press charges. More often than not, they don't do this because they fear this is hopeless. But we've made it clear that everything will be done to assist them in their legal proceedings, from the training of our police officers to welcome and listen to them, to the possibility of pressing charges online, which has just been voted into law. Every effort will be made to collect the evidence that will allow these crimes or offenses to be recognized as anti-Semitic, thanks to the creations of teams of specialized investigators and police officers all over the French territory. And then, it is also essential, in my view, to do more to contain the torrent of abuse pouring down every day on the internet. We are working with the parties that allow to fight us against the anti-Semitism that is being spread online. Let me tell you, there's nothing virtual about this form of anti-Semitism. The work that has already begun at the European level must be continued and accelerated. In France, Congresswoman Laetitia Avia has just proposed a bill to fight hate speech on the internet. This text is supported by the government and will include clear provisions that require the immediate withdrawal of all the contents that calls for hatred. It will assign responsibility with the platforms that harbor this content in order to be able to identify their authors, and it will raise the question of the right to anonymity, which is too often the mask of cowards. We believe the time has come to establish new red lines, and we want to pursue this effort with all of you, because the proliferation of hate speech online is a global phenomenon that calls for unified action. Finally, we must intensify our efforts to make education into a daily vehicle for the fight against anti-Semitism, and to this end, a rapid response team has been put in place in France to offer solutions to teachers who encounter difficulties with the teaching of the Holocaust within a 24-hour time frame. Additionally, the Ministry of Education will audit every school in which there has been disenrollment by Jewish children. We believe the Republican educational system should not tolerate intolerance. It is a duty of conscience for all of us, and this is why we're committed to continuing this fight and to sharing it with you all in the room and all of the people worldwide combating anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I believe you'll have questions about the situation in France later on, and unfortunately France became the on-the-spot of different little anti-Semitic and neo-Nazi attacks, and I'm sure that people will ask, but as I said, we appreciate very much the position of French government on these issues, and not only the position, but the actual implementation of different policies to prevent from this to happen. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just looking at this room, would like to introduce, to recognize a few major leaders of different organizations and some other people who are involved in this fight from the very beginning and revival of Jewish life in the former Soviet Union and specifically in Ukraine. So I see here in the first row the president of Eurasian Jewish Congress, Mikhail Mirilashvili. We just came back with him from a visit to Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, dealing specifically with these issues, meeting with the presidents of these states and the prime ministers. I would like to recognize the representatives, my colleagues from the European Jewish Congress, who came especially for this meeting from Brussels, the head of the Jewish community of Lithuania, Faina Kuklansky. I see here a person who really was from the very beginning almost a promoter of the Jewish community on the media in the former Soviet Union, Mr. Kiselev, who is with us here. I see here the mayor of Gush Etzion, Shlomo Neiman, and the representatives of many American and European organizations who fought for many years for what is happening today, for the freedom for the Jewish communities in the area. Our next speaker or next presentation is easy because I'm presenting a person that most of people in this room know very well, Rabbi Andrew Baker. He's the director of International Jewish Affairs of the American Jewish Committee, which he joined in 1979, and personal representative of the OSCE Chairperson-in-Office on combating anti-Semitism since 2009. A leading expert on anti-Semitism in Europe, he travels extensively to promote the fight against anti-Semitism in different countries, and I can witness, since I know Andrew for a long time, that he is one of the most effective advocates for Jewish issues and an excellent representative of Jewish communities at OSCE. So Andrew, please.
Thank you, Robert. You know, I want to echo something you said at your opening. Here we are, it's another gathering, international Jewish organizations, hosted by a well-established and effective national Jewish organization, the Confederation. Here we are with the foreign minister, with other diplomats, speaking to the very issues we've come to address. It's something that in a way has become normal, common. The challenges of fighting anti-Semitism, of building Jewish resiliency, we know quite well. But I think it's the very normalcy of having a conference like this here in Kyiv that's so extraordinary. I'm speaking to my old friend, Rabbi Blake Yaakov. I think we met 28 years ago when I first visited here, and you were the pioneer in rebuilding Jewish life. And who would have imagined, as you said, to be here today with what's taking place? So in a way, we still have all the old headaches, we have new ones, but there's something quite remarkable that we can be gathered here to strategize and discuss them. I was mindful last night at the film and in the remarks of Natan Sharansky, who talked about the challenge and even the conflict back in those days between advancing human rights and fighting for the freedom, and at the time it really meant the emigration of Soviet Jews, and how some wanted him to choose one or the other. It was at that same time that the OSCE was created, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It brought together the Soviet Union and its allies in Europe, together with Western Europe, and with the United States and Canada, and with America. It was an opportunity to challenge the Soviet Union on its human rights policy, a place to name names, which was not something easily done, to raise the cause both of refuseniks and the larger issues of bringing freedom and openness to a closed society. There's an irony here that the OSCE has continued even after the end of the Cold War, even after the fall of communism, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. But it was really a little less than 20 years ago that we saw anti-Semitism reemerge in parts of Europe where we weren't expecting to see it. In Western Europe, a resurgence of incidents, attacks on Jewish targets in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and elsewhere. We saw an international conference organized by the United Nations in Durban with the intention of fighting racism that, if anything, did at least the opposite when it came to the challenges of anti-Semitism. It renewed that old canard of Zionism equals racism. It made evident that the UN would not be a place, at least not then, to deal with the challenges of anti-Semitism. And so, in a complicated way, because the OSCE, now an organization of 57 governments, making decisions by consensus, was able to hold the first conference on anti-Semitism organized by any international governmental organization. It took place in 2003 in Vienna, and I have no doubt that the consensus was reached because many governments thought, we'll agree to one conference, one time, and we'll move on to other things. But that's exactly what did not happen. And a year later, a high-level conference in Berlin with the foreign ministers of many of those governments in attendance issued something that came to be known as the Berlin Declaration. And in that declaration, it first referenced that very issue we saw reemerging, anti-Semitism as it relates to Israel. It spoke clearly that anti-Semitism had taken on new forms and manifestations, a reference to that. And it had all of those governments together saying, we declare unequivocally that incidents in the Middle East, events in Israel, can never justify anti-Semitism. It said that at a time when only shortly before then, there were political leaders in Europe who were doing just that, excusing those attacks on Jewish targets, saying, well, this is because of the politics in the Middle East. So we've come a long way. We have now, in the context of the OSCE, further commitments by governments, a recognition of the importance of monitoring, of recording hate crimes, and really learning how to address them, of stepping forward with the very real security needs that Jewish communities face. Again, commitments that have been enunciated, new efforts to educate police and law enforcement, education to combat the problem of anti-Semitism. And throughout all of this, a recognition that we are not going to succeed if we're not clear-eyed in recognizing the threat, knowing that it presents itself in different ways in different countries, and we need to be mindful of all those different ways in which anti-Semitism is a scourge today. As has been said before, from the left, from the right, from migrant and immigrant communities, a challenge to authentic history, the reality that if the Holocaust itself is distorted or denied, it's not just an issue of history. It poses a very real security challenge to Jews who are themselves the very survivors or children of survivors of the Holocaust. One calls into question the very comfort and security of reviving Jewish communities, such as we see here today in Ukraine. So these are all aspects that the OSCE has been able to bring forward and to secure the commitment and involvement of respective governments in addressing those problems. We have had this success, but as I think everyone here knows, the problems have not diminished. So we need to redouble our efforts to look where we can, both for the commitments of national governments, as we've heard what's taking place now in Paris, as we've heard today of what's taking place here in Kyiv. When we were able to develop that first definition, that working definition of anti-Semitism back in 2004 with the European Monitoring Center, it was a time when people didn't even understand it, when monitors didn't have a reference when they were being asked to identify it. the fact that it's become more and more an accepted definition, an important vehicle to know what we're looking at, is, I think, an expression of the success we've had. But the very real problems that have been enunciated and that people around here have felt and experienced show still how there's so much work that we must do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Elan, the only question I have to you, did you fly Elan or Ukrainian Airlines that brought you exactly on time?
Ukrainian Airlines, I'm supporting the economy.
You see, so there is a hope. Elan Carr is the U.S. Special Envoy for Monitoring and Combating Anti-Semitism. Before that appointment, Carr was a Deputy District Attorney in the Los Angeles County District Attorney Office and the International President of the Jewish Fraternity Alpha Epsilon Pi. Carr is also a JAG Corps officer in the U.S. Army Reserve and an Iraq War veteran. During Carr's service in Iraq, he led U.S. soldiers in lighting a Hanukkah menorah in Saddam Hussein's presidential palace. Elan is a dear friend and a colleague who has demonstrated strong leadership on this issue and is doing a truly fantastic job. Elan, the way it works here, you have a 3-minute statement and then we'll take questions from the floor.
Perfect.
Is this on? Oh. What I miss? No, just kidding. It is such a pleasure to be here. First of all, let me apologize for my lateness. I am here directly from Israel. I was supposed to arrive last night. But apropos to the subject of anti-Semitism, some 600 rockets have been fired into Israeli civilian areas, which is really an attempt at mass murder of Jews in the state of Israel. And so I met with and my colleagues, ambassadors, U.S. ambassadors to 6 countries, actually. We met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and because of the scheduling and everything that he's dealing with, it had to be later, so I had to change my flight. So that's why I'm late. But I wanted to mention that because even in today's world, and even in the state of Israel, Jews have to be aware that there are those who are targeting the Jewish people for extermination, even today. And that's, of course, an awful fact, and that's why we're here. That's why we're here at a conference like this, to talk about not only anti-Semitism, but to talk about the Jewish future. And what I want to spend my time on, Robert, is not so much giving the bad news. You know, I'm asked to talk about the state of anti-Semitism in the world today. You know, attacks on Jews up. You all know the statistics, and maybe you've talked about it here before I walked in. Attacks are up, vandalism, anti-Semitic hate speech on social media, textbooks in classes sometimes, and even in the United States. You all know, even in the United States, a famously philo-Semitic country, we've been dealing with awful, horrific attacks on Jews in synagogues, which was unimaginable recently. But we're now in Ukraine. And so I'm not going to talk about the bad news. I want to talk about how extraordinary it is, where Ukraine has come, and how far Ukraine has come is a miracle that stands really in the very long history of the Jewish people, stands in a unique place. Now the United States, we don't take sides in elections, but we have to comment on how unprecedented it is that Ukraine has elected a Jewish president-elect and has a Jewish prime minister. That is something that is absolutely stunning. And there's something even more stunning. I've been following this very closely. Again, not because we take sides, but I very much wanted to see how the Ukrainian electorate would react to the dynamics of this election. There's something even more extraordinary about the election of a Jewish president. What is more extraordinary is that his Jewishness was entirely irrelevant. It did not come up. I've been briefed regularly, including classified briefings that I've been having on this subject, tracking what's going on here. And it is nothing short of stunning that in any country in the world, certainly in a country in Europe, given the history of Europe and given the history of Eastern Europe, that a candidate would never have his Jewishness raised as an issue in a campaign. By the way, I don't even know that that would happen in the United States. And so I want to just say that we have got to really appreciate how extraordinary this is and how far Ukraine has come. And one thing that I look forward, Minister, in our meeting later, and I understand I'll be meeting with the President-elect later today as well, talking about how I can be a champion of Ukraine in the months and years to come. Part of my role is it's not only to pummel and punish anti-Semites and to pressure, to apply diplomatic pressure when pressure needs to be applied. My role is also to support countries that are doing extraordinary things, and I look forward to being a champion of Ukraine and really empowering Ukraine to do even better. Now, that, of course, no society is perfect. The United States has issues that we need to work on. Everyone knows that. It's been in the news a lot lately. There are issues here in Ukraine as well. No society is perfect on the subject of anti-Semitism, but frankly on any subject, right? We're not perfect, and we always have to better ourselves. We always have to work to fix, what we should be doing better. But this is really an extraordinary time, and I want to compliment not only the candidates but the Ukrainian electorate. Again, not for the results, because that's not an issue I take, but for the way this campaign was conducted and the remarkable lack of focus on the Jewishness of a candidate who was leading in the polls and could have been attacked very easily on that issue.
Thank you, Elan. Just one remark, which before I open, I see that there are many questions in the room and we have limited time, so I will give up on my question to the panelists, but I do want to follow up on what Elan said. From the time that your plane took off to the time that you landed, the number of rockets fired to Israel is 700. And I just want everybody in this room just to imagine you're coming here from different cities, from Vilnius, from Latvia, from Finland, from Iceland, from different countries. We met this morning parliamentarians. Just imagine to yourself that 700 rockets would be fired to Reykjavik or Vilnius or to this area, and 30% of your population will be sitting with the kids and with the elderly in the shelters. And this is the reality that Israeli citizens are facing these days, and the world is silent. And as Elan said when he spoke in Israel to the delegation of the US ambassadors, if this is not the form of modern anti-Semitism, what this form is. Israel already had the Ukrainian Jewish prime minister, and she did pretty well. So we hope that the same will happen. In this country. I would like to open the floor. A few weeks ago I was at NATO, and I spoke to one of the senior ambassadors in NATO. And I told him, listen, there are 170,000 rockets targeting Israel, almost every place in Israel, from the north, and from Hezbollah, and from the south, from Hamas and all the other organizations. And I told him, how do you think people who live in Israel feel about this? We are a very advanced country. So he told me, according to our data, it's not 170,000 rockets, it's 162,000 rockets. It's a big difference. So I would like to open the floor. We have 15 minutes for questions, so I just want to ask that to have questions, not the statements, and also to introduce yourself and to say to whom you address your question. So please, I saw Emmanuel Zingeris, parliamentarian from Lithuania. Yeah. Just the mic.
Hello. Yes. I'm sorry. Of course, we are sharing our deep worries after this continuing efforts to wipe out Eretz Israel, who is only one place for our Jewish nation to be like a nation having statehood and continuation in the history. But coming to the details of the statements before, about scrupulous statement by Andy Baker, American Jewish Committee, I would like to ask which steps should be done in the future, having your working definition of anti-Semitism prepared through the remarkable, I remember being together at Berlin conference, now 16 years, to do by our distinguished governments and parliaments to implement finally the definition so scrupulously worked out by you and many governments, and finally to have that empowered in the place like a law. Andy, can you tell us about the future steps to implement this extremely important definition, who will include, of course, the worries from Am Israel and especially Israel, and have the worries of European Jewry including together? Thank you.
Andy, the deal is short questions, but also short answer.
The definition is an educational tool, first and foremost, for people who don't know what anti-Semitism is, don't realize how it presents itself in a variety of ways. What was controversial in 2004, to some extent still now, was anti-Semitism as it relates to Israel, essentially how anti-Zionism is a mask frequently for anti-Semitism. Jews conflated with Israel. It's a tool for educating police, prosecutors, and judges who will somehow excuse incidents and say they're political in nature, and yet they're clearly anti-Semitic. We're fortunate that the definition was taken up formally by IRA in 2016. It gave it a home after it was somewhat orphaned when the EUMC disappeared. It's now been endorsed by the European Parliament, a declaration by the European Commission. So even next month, there'll be a working group in Brussels to push governments to say, okay, you've adopted it, put it to use. Make it part of the education system. When you train prosecutors, make sure they understand what it's about. Whether it gets into a legal code may be secondary, but effectively we want people to know this is what anti-Semitism is about. No longer, at least, blinders or excuses.
Thank you, Andy. More questions? Yeah? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Edward Dolinsky. I'm director for Ukrainian Jewish Committee, and my question is for Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Klimkin. About International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. This organization was founded in 1998, and for already these 20 years, Ukraine have been consistently refusing to become a member of this main Holocaust organization in the world. There were various reasons not to become a member. There was a criminal regime, there was bloody regime, there was budget financing issues. You said about becoming a member of IRA, you personally, 4 years ago, then you said 3 years ago, then you said the same 2 years ago, and I can even quote you, and now you are repeating the same. When you were serious, then or now, before, when your government is going to leave?
I thought it's an easy meeting. Please, Minister.
Oh, no, it's an easy one. Thanks for this point. I'm actually quite serious. I would say I'm too serious, especially on such issues. And if you shuffle from my points and my political statements, I wanted, from the time I've been appointed foreign minister, to push Ukraine towards the formal membership in the alliance. Actually, it was our ministry, if you track down all the documents, when we officially brought this issue to the consideration of the Cabinet of Ministers. And the main problem, just for your understanding, was not different kind of regimes and problems and consideration. Unfortunately, the real problem, and we've been fighting against such a twisted narrative, was the point that us joining this declaration could spark the whole trigger of restitution issues. And because of that, we were actually refused to go forward. So now I hope it should be cleared by the president, because we have to join the alliance on behalf of Ukraine. There should be the clear drive about accepting, at least firstly, as non-binding the definition, and after that, it should be about our parliament to make it formal in the sense of ratification procedure. And basically, there are a lot of, as you've just said, different issues basically preventing us to go forward. But the most important issue was not about diplomacy, was not about foreign policy, but exactly the one I've just mentioned.
Minister, I know Eduard Dolinsky for a long time, so I'm sure he will follow up very closely on this issue. We have time for 3 questions. I have 1, 2, and will tell me who, and 3. Please.
Большое спасибо. Прежде всего, к уважаемому
for our presenter, well, I have a question. Can you name at least one country where on the grave of the victims of Holocaust you can see the memorials to collaborants as we have in Babi Yar here? I mean, the own members, those, do you think it's the reflection of anti-Semitism?
Look, I just mentioned, with everything I've been following over my years, firstly as a diplomat and now as a politician, it's always the issues of historical truth, where the emotions are running high. It's in the same way our track with Poland. It is the same way our track with a number of neighbors. I believe, and I've been trying to push forward a very clear narrative that it's about historians who should look into history, who should provide us with a clear idea how it had happened, and not to, try to politicize history. It's my clear point, and if you like, my position to any historic events. But at the same time, it's about clearly see what happened. I said many times, and not only Holocaust issue, it's obvious, but also on our difficult history on Volhynia region, we have to recognize our history, how it had happened, and we have to recognize when the crimes against humanity had happened. But at the same time, it should not be just whiter than white and kind of black history. I can't answer your point in the sense of basically going through every minute of the strategy, and I would be also, of course, open to go through with our historians. But my point is very simple. We need to understand and take our history as it is, both vigilant but also committed to its truth.
Thank you. Yes, please.
My name is Jerry Platt. I'm the president of American Friends of Likud, and I'm addressing this to Elan Carr. As Americans, we have been very lucky for the past 50, 60 years. The Ukrainians, in good times or in bad times, have been sensitive to anti-Semitism. But as an American Jew growing up in Manhattan, it's very foreign to us. You have a big agenda ahead of you, and I'm wondering how you can sensitize American Jews not so much to San Diego and Pittsburgh, but to the New York Times, which was profound.
Yeah, well, that's a very great question, an important question. We've been very lucky as Americans. The United States is the most philo-Semitic country in history. But let me say that we've been especially lucky for the past 2 years because we have an administration now from whom I bring you all greetings, from my boss, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and his boss, the President of the United States. And I can tell you that as a matter of policy and a matter of focused intention, we have never been more committed, and no president and no team has ever been more committed to the fight against anti-Semitism, to the protection of the Jewish people throughout the world, and to support of the State of Israel. Never before. And so I'm really thrilled to be able to represent an administration so focused on this issue. Now, so in the United States and around the world, one of the things Andy said in response to the last question about IRA, 2 questions ago, about the IRA definition, the anti-Zionism component is extremely important because putting aside fringe extreme groups as dangerous as they are, such as perpetrated Pittsburgh and San Diego, not groups, lone wolves inspired by ideology coming from that part of the spectrum. What is happening that is sweeping the United States and Western Europe and a lot of other parts of the world is an anti-Semitism that is newer. And it is anti-Semitism that masquerades as anti-Zionism. If you just switch the word Jew for the word Israel, or switch the word Jew for the word Zionist, it's all okay. And you can say anything, and you can print anything, and you can abuse people in an unvarnished way. If you just don't say Jew, just don't say that word, say Zionist in Israel, and it's all okay. You referenced the cartoon in the New York Times. That is an example, certainly. What's going on the campuses in Western Europe and in the United States is nothing short of appalling. And let me tell you how dangerous this is. I've had a lot of disturbing meetings in the last 3 months that I've been in this position, as you can imagine. Probably the most chilling that I've had of all of my meetings is with a Labour MP, UK Labour MP, who walked out of the Labour Party and said, I will not, I will not sit around a table with anti-Semites. It was her explanation for why she walked out. And she said to me, this disaster that we're dealing with, this all started on the campuses, and we did nothing because they were students. And then it came to the Labour Party, and we did nothing because it was a fringe. And now we're in serious, serious trouble. And so I think it is so important for us to combat not only the traditional anti-Semitism in the world that doesn't conceal what it is and says it's Jew hatred, but also the Jew hatred that hides behind this fig leaf of anti-Zionism. The danger of this new anti-Semitism is its wide acceptance. And that's something we have to fight all the time. And so that's been a focus of mine, and it's the focus of the President and the Secretary. Secretary Pompeo stood before 18,000 people at AIPAC and said, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And that was a groundbreaking statement by a U.S. administration. I look forward to carrying that message around the world.
Thank you. Yes, last question.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Ben-Nun. I am the president of Ukrainian Diamond Center and the deputy chairman of Ukrainian-Israel Business Council. My question is for Mr. Pavlo Klimkin, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm here already 17 years by business. I'm an Israeli citizen. And I can say, really, that I don't feel any anti-Semitism in Ukraine these years. Of course, there are some incidents, sometimes like in other countries. But most of all, I think here in these years, I didn't feel anything like this. But unfortunately, last year, there were some incidents in the borders of Ukraine and Israel for citizens for the countries that are coming to visit both countries. And please, if you can explain what is done to clear this situation and atmosphere, because I think it will be better that these incidents will not become. Thank you.
Thanks for this one. It's a really important one. I believe one of the most important achievements in our bilateral relations is our visa-free, regime. Basically, people go in without any bureaucratic, hurdles, needed to get a visa. So fundamentally, for me, it's simply about people-to-people links. If you see the network of flights between Israel and Ukraine now, it's top 3 also for Ukraine. You see how many people. We've been fighting for no kind of problems with refusals at the airport. In Ben Gurion Airport, the problems unfortunately turn up from time to time. We all know that. Sometimes, I personally believe, with some ground and something, sometimes really ungrounded. So the real problem is to increase trust and to increase basically the sense of how we're going to exchange it. At the same time, here the law enforcement authorities saw the necessity to have some people refused. We looked into all these issues after that together, and I can say it's going far better now in the sense of this exchange. What is important, and unfortunately we are all in a way dependent on political calendar. Now we're going to have the new Israeli minister in charge of internal affairs very soon. We have very intensive and very good, I would say, expert exchange on that. And I very much hope it's going to be cleared. Probably not from today to tomorrow, but it's going to be cleared in the sense of smooth exchange. Because if you ask me in the sense of bilateral relations, it's probably the only irritating point we still have in any kind of people-to-people contacts or any sort of sectoral cooperation between us.
Thank you. We run out of time, but I do want to give each one of the panelists an opportunity in one sentence to summarize this and just maybe to say how can we better join forces and think creatively to fight anti-Semitism globally and in Ukraine specifically, but really in one sentence. Andy? What is the message that you want to leave this room with?
You can't ask a Jew to summarize everything in one sentence, Robert. Although maybe that's my summary. There's a lot of work to do, but I think there's a lot of energy to marshal to it, and coming together collectively is clearly what we need to keep doing.
Ambassador?
Thank you very much. Just to say that I feel heartened in a very dire context that has been recalled this morning to hear some good news, including Ukraine's decision to join the IHRA. So let's keep on fighting together. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
I've said already a lot of points, but I would like to wrap up with one point which worries me personally a lot. As Ukrainian, as foreign minister, you've just mentioned it. It was great to have also in all kinds of confidential reports. It's pretty clear that there was no point about anti-Semitism raised ever into the campaign. Now we have a newly elected president who is a Jew by origin. We have the prime minister. It's great in the sense of Ukraine, but I'm very much worried that Russia is very good on all kinds of information wars. Now we're gonna start pushing very, very deliberately a kind of narrative trying to raise this reality. And we have to work together about countering this narrative. Unfortunately, we have too much of that experience about that. And here exactly, we also have to be vigilant.
Elan?
Well, I accept. I look forward to working with you exactly on that issue. With regard to summarizing it in one sentence, I would say I can even summarize it in one word: unity. We have to stand together and fight anti-Semitism together in every form, wherever it appears. Whether it appears in Ukraine, and it will. I mean, again, every society has issues. Whether it appears in Ukraine, or it appears in Western Europe, or it appears anywhere else, we've got to stand united, Jewish, non-Jewish, all decent people have to stand united against this ancient human sickness that President Trump calls a vile poison, and it is a vile poison because anti-Semitism destroys every society that embraces it. And so we all have to stand together united and fight this ancient sickness together, and that's how we will build a better world for our children.
I just want to summarize on my behalf this panel and thank all the panelists. I think really you had the best people possible, and thank you once again for the Federation for putting it together. You know, my wife jokingly is saying that since I became the CEO of the World Jewish Congress 6 years ago, the level of anti-Semitism only increased. But being serious, I'm traveling about 200 days a year in different places. And what we are seeing is really astonishing, unacceptable. Only last week, last Thursday, there were 6 neo-Nazi marches, 3 in Sweden, 3 in Germany, of all the places. And the week before, there were marches in Italy, commemorating the birthday of Mussolini. And this is something obviously that nobody would imagine only 20 or 25 years ago. I do want to say, and really, from people sitting in this room who are coming from different backgrounds, and not everybody here is Jewish, I do want to say that we don't feel alone. And the job of people like a minister, like a special envoy, and the ambassador, and Andy, and myself is really to bring everybody on board, not only Jewish. And I want to echo what Elan said. The only way to deal with this disease is to do it together. And to do it all together, different people of goodwill that understand the problem of this issue and understand that this disease need to be dealt with, and that it always, in many cases, it starts with Jews. It never ends with Jews. So we feel that we have friends all over the world, and on this positive note, thank you very much, all of you, and thank you for participating in this.
And thank you, Mr. Moderator.